Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Tanvai Asad Vritibhirakshibhirye Parhatantar Manasa Paresha Athana Pashyanti Urugaya Nunam Yete Padanyasa Vilasa Lakshya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 45. Synonyms: Tan, the lotus feet of the Lord. Why? Certainly. He, for. Asat, materialistic. Vrittibhi, by those who are influenced by external energy. Akshibhi, by the senses. Ye, those. Paraharta, missing at a distance. Anta manasaha, of the internal mind. Paresha, O Supreme. Atho, therefore. Na, never. Pashyanti, can see. Urugaya, O great. Nunam, but. Ye, those who. Te, your. Padanyasa, activities. Vilasa, transcendental enjoyment. Lakshya, those who see. Translation: O great Supreme Lord. Excuse me. O great Supreme Lord, offensive persons whose internal vision has been too affected by external materialistic activities cannot see your lotus feet, but they are seen by your pure devotees whose one and only aim is to transcendently enjoy your activities. I'll read that translation again. O great Supreme Lord, offensive persons whose internal vision has been too affected by external materialistic activities cannot see your lotus feet, but they're seen by your pure devotees, whose one and only aim is to transcendently enjoy your activities. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 1861, the Lord is situated in everyone's heart. It is natural that one should be able to see the Lord, at least within himself. But that is not possible for those whose internal vision has been covered by external activities. The pure soul, which is symptomized by consciousness, can be easily perceived even by a common man because consciousness is spread all over the body. The yoga system as recommended in Bhagavad Gita is to concentrate the mental activities internally and thus see the lotus feet of the Lord within oneself. But there are so many called yogis who have no concern with the Lord, but are only concerned with consciousness, which they accept as the final realization. Such realization of consciousness is taught by Bhagavad Gita within only a few minutes, whereas the so-called yogis take continuous years to realize it because of their offenses at the lotus feet of the Lord. The greatest offense is to deny the existence of the Lord as separate from the individual souls, or to accept the Lord and the individual soul as one and the same. The impersonalists misinterpret the theory of reflection, and thus they wrongly accept the individual consciousness as the supreme consciousness. The theory of the reflection of the Supreme can be clearly understood without difficulty by any sincere common man. When there is a reflection of the sky on the water, both the sky and the stars are seen within the water. But it is understood that the sky and the stars are not to be accepted on the same level. The stars are parts of the sky, and therefore they cannot be equal to the whole. The sky is the whole, and the stars are parts. They cannot be one and the same. Transcendentalists who do not accept the supreme consciousness as separate from the individual consciousness are as offensive as the materialists who deny even the existence of the Lord. Such offenders cannot actually see the lotus feet of the Lord within themselves, nor are they even able to see the devotees of the Lord. The devotees of the Lord are so kind that they roam to all places to enlighten people in God consciousness. The offenders, however, lose the chance to receive the Lord's devotees, although the offenseless common man is at once influenced by the devotee's presence. In this connection, there is an interesting story of a hunter and Devarshi Narada. A hunter in the forest, although a great sinner, was not an intentional offender. He was at once influenced by the presence of Narada, and he agreed to take the path of devotion, leaving aside his hearth and home. But the offenders, Nalakuvera and Manigrava, even though living amongst the demigods, had to undergo the punishment of becoming trees in their next lives. Although by the grace of a devotee, they were later delivered by the Lord. Offenders have to wait until they receive the mercy of devotees, and then they can become eligible to see the lotus feet of the Lord within themselves. Let me read that again. Offenders have to wait until they receive the mercy of devotees, and then they can become eligible to see the lotus feet of the Lord within themselves. But due to their offenses and their extreme materialism, they cannot see even the devotees of the Lord. Engaged in external activities, they kill the internal vision. The Lord's devotees, however, do not mind the offenses of the foolish in their many gross and subtle bodily endeavors. Let me read that again. The Lord's devotees, however, do not mind the offenses of the foolish in their many gross and subtle bodily endeavors. The Lord's devotees continue to bestow the blessings of devotion upon all such offenders without hesitation. That is the nature of devotees. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantakam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. A very good morning to you all, and thank you so much for joining us for this morning's class. On a beautiful Sunday morning, you can see the sun coming in through the windows, and summer is in its full beauty. Hopefully, it's not going to be as warm as yesterday, 95 degrees here in Naperville. And today it's supposed to be a lot better, and over the next few days, it's going to get even better. So much for the weather forecast. But we should be thankful and grateful to Krishna for giving us what he's giving us every time and all the time. So thank you again for joining us for this morning's class. So we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 5, and text 45. So a little background here so that we can catch up in case you're joining us after a while. So we're reading from the third chapter, third canto, as I said. Vidura has arrived in Haridwar, the source of the Ganges, to meet with the great sage Maitreya. Upon hearing the inquiries from Vidura about Sri Krishna, Maitreya Muni is answering and addressing his inquiries with great love and affection, right, and with a great amount of respect for Vidura, because Vidura is not an ordinary personality. And Maitreya Muni is no ordinary personality himself. They're wonderful, wonderful devotees and associates of the Lord, right? So Vidura wastes no time in any, coffee talk or, simple talk in terms of mundane topics. But instead, when he sees Maitreya, he immediately wastes no time in asking about Krishna, as we've been discussing over the last several weeks. And Maitreya Muni, in all earnesty, is also respecting where Vidura is coming from. And with his love for Krishna as well, he is exchanging, his thoughts and realizations about Krishna to Vidura. So that is the scene, right? So Vidura is asking these questions to Maitreya, and Maitreya is now answering these questions systematically. And he takes this example of how the demigods, when they were given these initial responsibilities at the time of creation of this material universe by the Lord, how they were unable to fulfill their duties. But they didn't get puffed up or say, hey, I have the responsibility, I have the authority, I'm going to try and do it my way. No, instead they approached the Lord, they approached Mahavishnu, and they offered beautiful prayers seeking guidance from Vishnu. So here Maitreya Muni is describing those questions and the way, the descriptions of the demigods in their address, in their request for empowerment from Vishnu, Krishna himself. So with that, let's get started with today's lecture. So I've titled it Anarthas and Association. What is the connection between the two? And we will spend a few minutes. Obviously, this is a very deep topic, and this can easily, extend into a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, a lot of references, and a lot of different pastimes that we can go through. And Srila Prabhupada, so I'm going to be touching on, some key points, focusing more on, the importance of, what are anarthas and the importance of association. Now, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada very clearly says, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord is situated in everyone's heart. It is natural that one should be able to see the Lord at least within himself. But that is not possible for those whose internal vision has been covered by external activities. Internal vision that has been covered by external activities. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada also says, the pure soul, which is symptomized by consciousness, can be easily perceived even by a common man because consciousness is spread all over the body. So one can ask the question, if the soul is pure, how can it be covered by the material activities of the body, right? The soul is pure, it is purely spiritual, but how can that be covered by the material activities of the body and this material energy around us? So in the Harinam Chintamani, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives the answer. I mean, very simple, but very effective. He says, we are covered by the cloud-like anarthas as we are nityabhaddhas or conditioned souls. And actually, the anarthas only cover the eyes of these conditioned eyes, right? These are the eyes of a conditioned soul. So the anartha is only covering the eyes, whereas the sun-like holy name of the Lord, which is non-different from Krishna himself, is so great that it can never be covered. And the jiva, being a part and parcel of the same super soul, is therefore same in quality, although different in quantity. We know that, right? when we accept that as devotees. So the quality of the soul is still pure. It can never be covered. It is the conditioned eyes of these Nityavaddas that we experience that effect, that material energy is overwhelming, and we're completely overtaken and overwhelmed by this energy to forget about the true nature of the soul, right? And then these anarthas are also further detailed in the Sajjana Toshani. Sajjana Toshani was an editorial, a periodical in Bengali that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had, authored, published, and edited since 1881. Okay, and in that he's given very detailed descriptions. These are all his wonderful realizations. And as you know, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is considered the seventh Goswami. He was the author of many, 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 many books, in spite of his very highly responsible, highly visible role that he played as, the magistrate and appointed, in that honorary role by the British Empire. He had a tremendous responsibility. But while he was performing his given appointment as a magistrate, he was also completely engaged in devotional service and authoring, sharing his realizations through his many, 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 many books, over 100 books that he had written in a short span, talking about and expounding the philosophy to help the common man understand and appreciate Krishna consciousness. So in that, he says there are four anarthas that are preventing us from taking the shelter of the holy name or taking the shelter of Krishna. The first one is Swarupa Brahm. Swarupa Brahm is the forgetfulness as to our constitutional position, our misidentification of this body. The second one is Asat Arsant, our hankering after material things. The third one, Aparadha, our offenses to the devotees. And the fourth one is Daurlabhya or Hridaya Daurlabhya, weakness of the heart. And in yesterday's, or it was the last class that Gopal Hari Prabhu had given, he described these anarthas. I'd like to just build on that and take it a little further. So all of these are important to consider and not to be taken lightly, right? It starts with our forgetfulness of our constitutional position. And when I first heard the term constitutional position, my thoughts, during my initial years, even before I started Krishna consciousness, the practice of Krishna consciousness, I was thinking, what are we talking about here? Is it the constitution as in the nationality, right? Is it the constitution of this nation versus that nation? So here I'm not talking about the national constitution, but the constitutional position of our soul. Swarupena Vyavasthiti. That we are a part and parcel of the super soul. And therefore, we're eternally separate from the Lord, which means we are also meant to serve up to the Lord, right? That is our constitutional position. That is our relationship. He is the Supreme Lord, and we serve the Supreme Lord, right, as the parts and parcels. So this forgetfulness then leads to the second anartha, that is to serve ourselves. So rather than serving up to the Lord or serving the Lord, we're serving ourselves instead, hankering after material objects in, rather than engaging in devotional service, we're hankering after these material objects or attachments because we identify these things with our bodies. A good wife, a good car, a good home, a good family, a good job, and the list goes on and on and on and on, right? Now, these in turn lead to the weakness of the heart or Hridaya Daulabhyam. So when it comes to engaging devotional service, there is this weakness, there is this failure from our side in terms of committing ourselves. We find it so difficult. Even though, as devotees, we know that devotional service is the surest way to Krishna, we still find it. There is so much resistance, right? There is a lack of commitment because there is a stronger urge that is constantly bombarding us and impelling us towards hankering after material things, right? Going after this, going after that. It is so strong that we simply don't have the determination to overcome that. And we're going after what? We're going after these so-called things that are shiny, but they're only shiny plastic, and not real diamonds. And we know how easy it is to buy happiness, right? We're going after material happiness, a moment of happiness here and a moment of happiness there. They're transient, they're fleeting, they're never permanent in this material world. That is not real happiness, right? Real happiness is only in Vaikuntha or in the spiritual planets, where there is no anxiety and where the happiness, the bliss is eternal, right? And that is only through the service of the Lord. Whereas here in this material world, here in this material world, we're only hankering after these so-called, material happiness, objects and moments of material happiness. And it is so easy to buy that. For under $3, you can go to a McDonald's or a Burger King, right? As a non-devotee, you would do that. People do that, right? And that's why they are in the business. In fact, they call that happiness, but pretty soon, there are side effects. There are other things that happen, not always as bad, but nevertheless, that hunger is never satiated. Now, just to recall one example, when I first came to the country, to the US, to do my master's back in the mid-80s, I was shocked to actually see that it was easier, it costed less to buy a can of beer than to buy a bottle of water. And perhaps even after all these years, it's the same way. It may be cheaper, I don't know, but that was something that struck me. I was like, what's going on here? It is easier to buy alcohol. It is easier to, it's less expensive. Even as a student, it was less expensive to buy a can of beer than to buy a bottle of water. So the point is that we're driven by instant gratification, right? That we go after these so-called moments of happiness without even stopping to think about how this is really going to impact us or how karmically binding these so-called moments of happiness are. So why is that? I mean, even as devotees, what to speak of non-devotees, right? What to speak of the common man? What to speak of the person who has no clue about spirituality or any spiritual philosophy for that matter? But even as devotees, we find ourselves at these crossroads. I mean, I'd be lying to you. I'd be lying to you if I say that I'm never in this situation, right? Example, it's Ekadasi, and the person next to me has a juicy gulab jamun. You think my mind is saying, oh, I can do Ekadasi. I'm not even going to cringe. I'm not even going to, think twice, even looking at that plump gulab jamun. You think my mind is going to say that? No, I'd be lying if I said that. So these are the kinds of things that we face on a day-to-day basis, even as devotees, because we are living in the material world. We're not living outside of the material world, we're living in the material world. So we are engulfed by the material energy, the external energy. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his famous O Vaishnava Thakur, also says, Ekaki Amara, Nahi Paya Bala, Harinama Sankirtane. So he says, Ekaki Amala, just by myself, ekaki amara or amara. Ekaki amara, just by myself alone. Nahi paya bala. Bala. Bala is, I don't have the strength. I don't have the strength. Nahi paya bala. I am not able to muster that strength, that determination. To do what? Harinama Sankirtane, to chant the holy names. So then moving on to the next anartha, which is parada or offenses. Offenses against devotees. That is like icing on the cake. Only it's not as sweet tasting, but it is actually the scum of the earth that we're smearing ourselves, all over ourselves. It brings out the worst in us: lust, envy, greed, and even anger, and among other things. These are the unwanted qualities, and we see that every day. We see that every day. For instance, change lanes, driving, and then you have the person, and you're cutting the car off. The car behind us, you're cutting them off, and you look in your rearview mirror, and what do you see? The guy is actually showing you his middle finger, right? Or he's screaming expletives, right? You can see him mouth saying something completely irate. And by the way, please don't mess with road rage. It's a growing trend in America. In fact, in Texas, I was appalled to see they even have shotguns mounted on their dash and their cars and so on. So, on the contrary, in India, you can expect the guy in front of you to cut anytime. I mean, that is something you need to expect the unexpected, right? So the guy in front of you can cut anytime, and so you need to expect that, and you need to drive accordingly. And when he does that precariously, you're upset. That's your natural reaction, right? Your first reaction. But instead you're saying, kya ghar pe bol ke aaya kya? In other words, have you told your folks at home that you're going to be committing suicide today, right? But that's the way they drive. So different cultures react differently, but at the same time, talking about road rage on a sidebar, avoid that, be careful, and expect the unexpected. Things are, trends are changing. And even here in America, a lot has changed. Even in the last 35 years that I've been here, courtesy is slowly, being displaced by road rage. In fact, in a more recent example of offensive behavior, my Guru Maharaj was on a flight recently where he had, he was sitting with other passengers as well, and he was under the weather. And so, with all the travel and so on, I mean, he's going from place to place to place to place constantly, giving and spreading the message of Lord Chaitanya and his teachings, and giving Krishna to everybody. And in doing so, health does come in the way, and we're all human beings, so we're still subject to viruses and this and that, right? And the stresses and strains of life. So anyway, long story short here, Maharaj was under the weather, and he had this urge to cough, and so he coughed and he coughed into his dhoti. But the passenger next to him was so upset that he not only uh, chastised Guru Maharaj, but he continued to be that way throughout the flight, to the point that even as they were deboarding the flight, he was being nasty to Maharaj. So such people can never see the lotus feet of the Lord. I mean, any doubts about that, any question about that, you will find people like that. And that's what Prabhupada is saying in this purport. Prabhupada is saying in this purport that such people can never see the lotus feet of the Lord unless they receive the causeless mercy. I mean, this person, maybe down the road, he will realize, and Krishna will give him that realization And here was a pure devotee sitting right next to him, and he didn't even realize that. He completely missed out on that opportunity. Instead, he was committing offenses against a devotee of the Lord. So, how do we avoid these anarthas? We are in Kali Yuga, and therefore we are inextricably immersed, we're engulfed in these anarthas. I mean, we're constantly being impelled to commit these anarthas. So Srila Rupa Goswami has composed this beautiful song, and I heard this from Amarendra Prabhu, who recited it so beautifully, and it resonated so nicely in my heart. I mean, it was so attractive. Krishna Deva Bhavantam Vande Manmanasa Madhukaram Arpaya Nijapada Pankaja Makarande. It is a beautiful. So he's saying, basically, Rupa Goswami is saying, Krishna, I'm offering my humble prayers to you. Manmanasa Madhukaram Arpaya Nijapada Pankaja Makarande. Nijapada Pankaja Makarande. So he's saying, please let the bee of my mind be offered the nectar or the nectarian honey of your lotus feet. Manmanasa Madhukaram Arpaya. Let it be offered the Nijapada Pankaja. Nijapada Pankaja. So the nectar of your lotus feet, may that be offered to the bee of my mind. So that is the mood in which Rupa Goswami is expressing, how, some of these, this is the mood that we need to be as devotees throughout. Constantly begging and humbly requesting from Krishna and the pure devotees to keep us in that state of humility so that we can stay away from these anarthas. So the last several verses, in fact, talking about Pada Pankaja, right, where the last several verses are constantly referring to the lotus feet. So the prayers of the demigods to the Lord are constantly referring to the lotus feet. And the lotus feet are constantly also described in many, many, many sections of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Namaste Pankajangriya. Right? I offer my respectful obeisances unto the soles of your feet that are engraved with lotuses. So this is the lotus feet. These are the lotus feet of the Lord that are being referred to. And what is at the lotus feet? Transcendental knowledge, right? It is through transcendental knowledge that one can eventually attain bhakti, that can deliver us from this vicious cycle of birth and death, right? Because we're constantly, like I said, we're in Kali Yuga, we're constantly engulfed, we're constantly being pounded by the external energy, and we are impelled to to commit these anarthas. So the way to get out of that is the first step is to have access to this transcendental knowledge. Because it is through this transcendental knowledge even that we will know the right from the wrong. That we can even exercise the power of discretion in terms of discriminating and discerning the right from the wrong. Otherwise, we don't know the difference. And if you go by everyday standards, those are constantly changing. They're constantly changing. What used to be a standard 10 years ago is not the standard today. It's a different standard, right? An example, when we were growing up back in India in the school, we would be disciplined, and disciplinary action normally started with a cane or a slap. Or we would even be humiliated to the point of being being told to stand on the bench in front of all our fellow students for the whole period of the class, the whole duration of the class. Try doing that today. Try doing that even at home. I'm not telling you to do it. Please don't do it. But I'm saying what was a standard then is not a standard today. So these things change on a regular basis. But what is constant is transcendental knowledge, knowledge that we are receiving from bona fide sources like Srimad Bhagavatam, from the Bhagavata as well, from the devotee. So this transcendental knowledge is telling us, giving us the means by which we can transcend, by definition, this material energy that we're surrounded by. And so then it becomes less overwhelming. And this transcendental knowledge, fortunately, by causeless mercy of the devotees, the pure devotees, we have access to this knowledge. So, talking about how, the pure devotee is going from place to place to place to place, they're actually freely giving this transcendental knowledge. There's no charge for it, right? They're going through, and in fact, they're, on the other hand, they're going through all the possible, they're having to deal with these material asuras or modern day asuras and all of the various material inconveniences. But yet, they're able to transcend that. They're able to get above that, make those sacrifices, not, grudgingly, but happily, blissfully distributing the love of God, distributing the word of God, giving us this transcendental knowledge. And this is Krishna's causeless mercy, because it's coming from him. And the pure devotees are his instruments through which, they're giving us and imparting this transcendental knowledge. So the answer to the question, how do we overcome or how do we avoid these anarthas, is to nurture Krishna consciousness in the association of devotees. So that is key. That is key, right? These anarthas are a part and parcel of this material energy. Okay, so if we don't pay close attention, we will be committing those anarthas. But if we are conscious that these are anarthas and we need to avoid them, that's the first step, then we will take to the association of devotees, like-minded devotees, pure devotees, so that we can advance in spiritual consciousness or Krishna consciousness. That way, we're able to overcome the effects of anarthas. Now, Vidura was a great devotee of the Lord, and he could have stayed in isolation after he left the palace. He was humiliated, he was insulted by Duryodhan. He could have, just hid under a rock, or he would have, stayed in isolation and remained in that isolation for, till the end of his day. But he didn't do that. He actively chose to visit places of pilgrimage and stay in the association. He actually sought out the association of devotees, right? So he met with Maitreya Muni in this case, right? And he was asking intelligent questions, and in all honesty, right? These were not superficial or academic, but these were in all honesty, in all humility, and in all gratitude to learn about and hear about Krishna. And it's not like he didn't know Krishna. He is an eternal associate of Krishna, Yamaraj in his previous birth. And even in this pastime, he is closely associated with Krishna. But yet he is asking about Krishna, with that enthusiasm, with that inquisitiveness, not just for himself, but also for all the others, for the common man. And when we think of Krishna, right, because by being in the association of devotees and by constantly engaging in the pastimes of Krishna, talking about Krishna, discussing topics of Krishna, one is in constant remembrance of Krishna. Then it becomes a very natural and organic thing, right? We immediately have the association of Krishna, right? When we are remembering Krishna, then we are having the association of Krishna. No difficult postures required, like in yoga postures or anything like that. We just need to stay in the association of devotees. It's as simple as that. We just need to stay in the association of devotees, and devotees are so merciful. Devotees are so merciful that they're constantly, giving us that remembrance, ways in which we can remember Krishna, and discussing their pastimes and so on. Krishna. So it becomes easier. So you could be working, you could be studying, you could be, just being in the association of devotees. Whether you're cooking or otherwise, whether you're performing day-to-day tasks, being in the association of devotees. And Srila Prabhupada has created this beautiful institution for us where no matter which part of the world we are, we have the opportunity to associate with devotees. So as Vidura also says, such constant remembrance of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna by the devotee who has achieved transcendental bliss vanquishes all miseries without delay. So I'm reading from the Bhagavatam here. Vidura says, such constant remembrance of the lotus feet of lotus feet of Lord Krishna by the devotee who has achieved transcendental bliss vanquishes all his miseries without delay. So the remembrance of Krishna is the bottom line, right? And how that happens is through the association of devotees. And through the association of devotees, one can avoid anarthas. So in summary, I know we're getting close to time here, but in summary, it is our forgetfulness that causes us to commit anarthas. Forgetfulness as to our swarupena vyavasthiti, right? Our constitutional position, our relationship to Krishna, understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality, and understanding that we are not this body, right? That forgetfulness and misidentifying ourselves with the body is what causes us to commit anarthas. And then we also discuss the 4 types of anarthas, right? And the way to overcome these anarthas is by nurturing Krishna consciousness. And how do we do that? Being in the association of devotees. By being in the association of devotees helps us stay in the Krishna conscious zone without being hassled by the external energy. Gulab jamuns or no gulab jamuns. Ekadasi or no Ekadasi, we can do it. We can do it. I know it's always been a challenge for me, but devotees do it so blissfully, and seeing them and being in their association, it becomes easier. You're not thinking about food. You're not thinking about how difficult it is to fast. There will be days when you're sitting in front of, or I can say this from my own personal example, I could be sitting in front of the computer, for hours, not even realizing or thinking about food. I'm so engrossed. I'm trying to get my work done. I have a deadline to meet. I have a deliverable to make. I'm not thinking about food. But come Ekadasi, my mind is constantly drifting towards food. Can I eat this? Can I eat that? Oh, but if I eat this, this has that. It has beans. It has grains. Oh, and so the mind is hankering after that. It's constantly dwelling on that. No matter how much work you have, how many deliverables you have, on Ekadasi, the mind is invariably, incessantly, relentlessly going into thoughts about food. Okay, that's just an example. Okay, so there are other extreme examples. Like I said, anarthas that we commit out of greed, envy, anger, lust, all of those things that come about. We can very easily avoid that when we are in the association of devotees. Now, in the case of my spiritual master and his not so friendly travel companion, Guru Maharaj could have very easily said, why is this happening to me? Or he could have reacted. Instead, he took this as a lesson from Krishna, as a lesson to learn from Krishna. You know, in all humility, his realization was that there is something for me to learn from this. He didn't let that get under his skin, the behavior of this passenger. It didn't let him get under his skin. Instead, he took the shelter of Krishna and was able to move from there and learn from there, the realizations that he had, from that episode. But the important part is that he was able to remember Krishna and take Krishna's shelter. And that is the lesson that we need to take back. In instances where we are completely overwhelmed by Maya, rather than committing further anarthas, we should be taking them as lessons, receiving them as lessons from Krishna. That's how we should be processing them. So with that, I'd like to offer my humble obeisances to you all. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I know this is a very deep topic, but I just wanted to at least get us oriented, directionally, so that the importance of association comes through, and also the the importance of anarthas as to how and why we should be avoiding these anarthas, because it just keeps us away. We're not able to see Krishna. The lotus feet of Krishna is nothing but the transcendental knowledge that we're getting from Krishna. It's his causeless mercy that we're getting through his pure devotees. So with that, I would like to thank you all again. Hare Krishna.